Good afternoon. My name is Michelle Ashton. I'm the Director of Communications for the Fish and Wildlife Foundation of Florida. And on behalf of our entire board and staff, I want to thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day to join us for a conversation about pythons. A couple of quick housekeeping items before we get going. Could you please double check to ensure that your mic is muted and remains muted throughout the duration of our time together? The exception is during the question and answer portion at the end. If you have a question, you can use the raise your hands feature. I'll call on you, ask you to unmute, and you can speak directly with Ian. The second way to ask a question is to drop it in the chat, and I can ask it for you. That option is particularly helpful if you have a question that pops up during the presentation and you want to make sure you don't forget it. I'm very excited to be able to introduce Ian Bartoszek today. Ian is a wildlife biologist and a science project manager for the Conservancy of Southwest Florida. He's going to share his insights from a project he's been working on for many years, tracking snakes, invasive Burmese pythons throughout South Florida using various technologies. Ian's project, our intersection with the work is we were able to give a grant 2 years ago now via our Conserve Wildlife plate, our bear plate, which the redesign of which was released about a year ago now. And that would helped in some small part to fund Ian's work. So we're just really honored and excited to be able to welcome Ian, and I'm gonna throw it over to you.
Excellent. Thank you for the interest in this topic, invasive species, Burmese pythons. I'm going to share some information from over 9 years of research on this apex predator that's now part of the Everglades ecosystem. So I put together a presentation, and I'm going to talk a little fast to share a lot of information, but hopefully I cover some of your questions early. And if you have some of those that I didn't, I'll be happy to take them during or after the presentation. So that's shared screen. So let's see, we good? Excellent technology. Okay, well, first, I want to thank the Fish and Wildlife Foundation. They were tremendously helpful a couple seasons ago to just keep us moving in the right direction on our removal phase of this project. But as you can see with these logos up here, it definitely takes a village, and we benefit from partners and support all across the board, federal, state, and not-for-profits, keeping us moving forward on this topic. So everything I'm going to share with you comes from 9 years and from a small portion of the state, the southwestern portion outside of Naples. I'll have one map that'll kind of orient us, and then share with you a lot of observations from the field. But first off, we're dealing with one of the largest snakes on the planet, and you can see where they call their home range in Southeast Asia. And we don't have a good population assessment here in the state of Florida, but it might be a safe bet to say we may have more pythons, Burmese pythons in South Florida than they do remaining in Southeast Asia. They're vulnerable from over harvesting for meat, leather, and traditional medicines. And and they got here from the pet trade. Hundreds of thousands were brought in since the 70s. And this one is very much out of the bag. But that one that's being held in the hand there, the problem with this species is that their niche is to get large fast. And the next slide is going to show you what that looks like when you don't take care of your python problem. This is what happens. This is the second largest snake we caught on the project at 185 pounds. So the moral of the story for this presentation will be, what do you think these animals are up to out there to reach that considerable biomass out across the greater Everglades? It just, every season tracking, we think we know what a big python is, and then they surprise us. And the other mantra for this presentation is, don't underestimate the Burmese python. So our study area here, just to clue you in, is not in the middle of the Everglades. It's very much on the edge of the urban wildlands boundary here in southwestern Florida in Collier County. My office that you're seeing me from is in Naples at the Conservancy of Southwest Florida next to the Naples Zoo. And I can be tracking one of my pythons 5 minutes away from the office. So we're not in the middle of nowhere here on this project. So how do you get started tracking pythons? You gotta hunt them down. Here's some footage from years back, jumping on another snake. We already had 2 bagged in the ATV there. Saw one basking, kind of fumbling around in the grass there to get heads, get tails. Advanced technique, keep the tail away so they don't crap all over you or your friends. And I'm asking, are we have any more snake bags? And intern is saying we're out of snake bags. So this became an important tagged animal. This was a male, not a very big python. We don't consider them big till they get over 100 pounds. And we used to think that was big, and maybe I'm changing the definition now. So this animal became tagged. What I mean by tagged is insertion of a radio transmitter inside the snake. They can't wear collars, as you'd imagine. And we can't do this project without our veterinarian partners. Dr. Jeffrey Noble is tagged, I don't know, I've lost count of how many pythons he's surgically implanted transmitters for us. And just keep in mind, we're using World War II tech to follow these snakes with the radio telemetry. The satellite units, they're not ready yet. And they put an antenna outside the snake. This is sort of basic hide and seek, one-way hide and seek, track the python on the ground. They don't find us, we find them. And then if you haven't ever used radio telemetry, that antenna is directional. When you point it to where your snake's beeping from, it gives you a louder signal or a louder readout, and it's fainter or colder. So like hot and cold, hide and seek, that's how we play the python tracking game. And here's a bit of the location information, just to give you an idea of what we're gathering out there over the years to get us where we are. Here's a capture point in the center of the screen. And I always like to play the game, where do you think the python went over a couple seasons? So here's 2 years for this specific animal. His name was Jaeger. Here is how his dots connected. And remember, these dots aren't every day, or they may be a week, they may be 2 weeks during the summer. So it's kind of spotty, but connect the dots, wrap a polygon, get a rough home range estimate. And these animals are using large chunks of territory on the ground. These are snakes that are roaming. And this was some of the basic information we needed to get at so we could start to work towards management strategies on this animal. You got to know your enemy. And we put out a publication. It's an Ecosphere open access if you want to track it down last year. Home range estimates for southwestern Florida. You can see the males have much higher home ranges than the females, but they're still using big chunks of territory on the ground. This is very useful for getting after them. We had over 25 snakes tracked, and you can look that publication up if it's of interest. And then just to dive into some fun facts on their behavior on the ground, this clued us in a day in the life of the project. I think back in 2015, we were tracking some male pythons, and they both were located in a gopher tortoise burrow. With permissions, excavated the gopher tortoise burrow and found 4 additional male pythons, plus our 2 male pythons, plus the larger female you can see on the left there or on your screen. And so that was a mating aggregation, and they were using our state listed tortoise burrows as those microhabitat features. Since then, we've seen down here in this part of the state that they use these subterranean refugia often, armadillo burrows, gopher tortoise burrows, holes in the ground, especially during the breeding season, they're going to use it. And here's some imagery on a time-lapse camera to give you an idea what that looks like. There's a large female coming out of the gopher tortoise burrow, followed by one male. Which way did she go? Looking for her or smelling for her. and another one coming out of there as well. So over the years, we've busted up a lot of python aggregations and armadillo burrows and tortoise burrows, but the most parts of the state, well, the southeastern part of the state doesn't really have much of that habitat left. But as we would get further north from here, you know, gopher tortoises range all through the southeast, and that provides a very stable temperature environment way down underground. So if the tortoises can wait out the freezes, pythons would be able to wait out certain freeze events as well. And this is just to show we put all of our observations in the journals when we can. You can find a lot of our notes in Herp Review, much like that gopher tortoise burrow note. So at a day in the life of a python, this is what all the gravid female pythons are doing now, or the former gravid female pythons. They are the ones we didn't catch, and others that were on to their reproductive cycle this year. It's generally every other year, are sitting on eggs right now. So here's a photo of removing a pretty pissed off female from her egg clutch. This was a tagged one that we had in the project many years ago. She showed us some very interesting information on where they choose to lay their egg clutch. This one was under exotic grass, totally hidden. You'd never know that snake was there in a million years. And you can see that that's a great advantage for her eggs, to have mama sitting on them, guarding them for 2 months. So those are incubating. She has some unique abilities, keep a stable temperature on them. And she's not going to let any raccoon or anything nearby get after those egg clutches. You probably saw some photos of bobcats and pythons, and yeah, that, you know, that female guards that egg clutch, and it puts up quite a good defense. So this is what happens here in the lab often. I wouldn't play beer pong on this table in here. You're looking at the more pinkish, peachy colored egg follicles. And then on the other side of the screen would be further developed eggs before they're hatched. And the white globs are fat bodies. So that's the fat of the land. That's raccoon, rabbit, deer, you name it. These animals are just, you know, super fit when they're laying these eggs, and they are very much egg laying machines. So this would be, the peachy color would probably be February of a breeding season year, of a year. And then the whitish eggs would be in April, right before they lay. So as I mentioned, most pythons probably laid by now, the core of them. And then so they'll be sitting on them for 2 months, and then give or take a few weeks. 4th of July is usually, you'll start seeing them on the roads, and then they're off to the races. So just so you can see, we do some science here in the lab. What you're seeing are the potential developing egg follicles plotted on the number of eggs on the left and the total length of the snake on the bottom. And just to show you that lower left, python under 8 feet in length already had 12 eggs. That's probably not as typical to see them that young, but still very much possible. But then you can see in the upper portion of the graph, and we just blew this out of the water with the number of eggs we've seen in pythons this season. But one of the larger ones we had, a 17-footer, already had 95 eggs. So average clutch, 43 to 45 pythons. That's a lot of eggs putting out there. But the next follow-up question that I always get is, well, how many make it? And we have some information on that with some help from Water Management District grant and our contract. And then our visiting researcher, Dr. Pittman, who we tracked a lot of hatchling pythons. And a safe estimate, just to throw out, is less than 10% will make it to adulthood. It's probably even much less than that. But we need a little more information following more of these guys around. Our colleagues in Big Cypress are starting to follow them around there so they can see what they're doing in that bioregion. And so, yes, most of them won't make it to adulthood. There seems to be about a 50-50 sex ratio, give or take, but clearly enough of them are reaching that adult size to cause serious problem. So this is not a python, and points if you know what it is, because it's one of our coolest native endangered snakes in the state. That's an eastern indigo. And when this photo was taken, one of our hatchling pythons we were tracking was in the belly of this eastern indigo. So one of the bright spots on this project, when you can see the native fauna fighting back, we put that note out there as well. But last season or the previous season, we had another cool observation. Look at the radiographs here. Those are two different cottonmouths that had swallowed hatchling pythons, one from the tracking program here at the Conservancy and the other from the tracking program in Big Cypress. So that was a more recent note. And that's a good sign, because if our cottonmouths are getting after them, they're definitely not as endangered as eastern indigo snakes, and they're wide ranging. So there's a lot of predators picking python off at a small size is the take home message. We know eastern indigo snakes, cottonmouths, some other snakes and alligators. And then there's some yet undescribed mammal predator that really gets after them that we just haven't been able to see in action, because we don't see them when they're chewing up and spitting out our transmitter that was in the python. But here's why we're talking about python. Here's some really cool information from our colleagues at the University of Florida. All of our pythons we necropsy, they're humanely put down, the ones we're not tracking. And this is a compilation of items, mammals found in the bellies of python throughout the invaded range. So samples from Southwest Florida, samples from Southeast Florida, Everglades National Park, and we're at 24 species of mammal. You can't make this stuff up. And we're also 2 reptiles, alligators and iguanas, I believe. And then this is a pretty telling list here of the number of bird species. So this isn't an updated list. They told me last week or two that they're up to 47 species of bird. So it's insane. I can remember on one of the snakes we had that we necropsied, then when the information came back, it had the remains of a gray fox, and then right behind it was a black-crowned night heron. So that should give you an idea what these animals are capable of, and they don't discriminate. And when you see magnificent frigate bird on the list, you just blows your mind how they even snagged one of those. But that would have been the southern part of the park, I think. But it's just, can't make this stuff up. And this graphic is hypothetical, but it really gives you that idea of what's going on out in the Everglades with these cascading effects through the system. When you think like that snake that I showed the picture of, the big one there, what she's been eating her whole life, when she starts out as a hatchling, tiny little hatchling like this, and then turns into a big mama, and take your pick on what that animal ate to get to that size, and then multiply this little prey pyramid by thousands, and you're getting a sense of the greater Everglades ecosystem changing real time, and you really can't make this up. And I'll try to convince you of that if you haven't seen these graphic images before. Heads up. This was, I kind of think, the day on the life of the project for me where I was sold on what the python was doing. I think this was April 15th, 2015, 2014. I'm losing track now. And this is a very small python we tagged, a female that didn't breed that year. So place your bets. What's inside this python? Wheels are spinning in my head in this image. I couldn't believe the snake I saw 1 week to the next had a prey bulge this big. And here's why. She snagged a fawn, a white-tailed deer, and that's the deer coming out. So she definitely went in that way. And here's another viewpoint. It's pretty graphic, but kind of, you got to digest this image because this is what's happening out there. And I'll make a case that this is happening a lot more than we realize. I'm seeing this more and more. And this is extremely worrisome because, as you know, that's the white-tailed deer is the primary prey of the Florida panther. And if this is happening more often than we realize, then that is definitely not doing the Florida panther recovery any favors, period. And someone will need to investigate this a little further from the deer side of the equation. In the core area, we're tracking python, not deer, but I can tell you dozens of times on this lab table, we've opened up Burmese pythons, and there's been remains of white-tailed deer, primarily the hoof cores that don't digest. And it's not just the large pythons. Most pythons over 100 pounds that we cut up here, depending on the time of the year we get, have white-tailed deer remains inside. Most pythons over 100 pounds that we open up in here have white-tailed deer remains inside. And here's an image of a python on your screen that weighs 31.5 pounds and a white-tailed deer fawn that weighs 35 pounds. Just think about that for a second. That's 111% of the prey to python ratio. That's what they're capable of. That's in the literature. That's the largest currently documented prey to Burmese python size ratio on the planet. And then just when we think, that's an anomaly, something like this comes to our lab this season, and it's hard to tell for scale what we're looking at here, but that is a 10-pound python with a 6-pound fawn for simplistic calculation purposes. So that fawn probably just dropped and the python was already onto it. So there's one example of a 10-pound python with a 6-pound fawn. You just saw the 31.5-pound python that ate a 35-pound fawn, and all the ones that we've seen from the larger size class. I think we have a problem here. We also find other interesting things inside the belly of python. So what do you think these are? These are claw cores, and they are feline. So they could only be a couple things here. And we called in our friends from the state to take a closer look, thinking, hey, could be a juvenile panther. This one turned out to be probably a large male bobcat in the order of 40 pounds when they looked at the hair follicles closer. And then just on Friday, we did a necropsy of a 150-pound python here, and it had more bobcat claw cores in there as well. So serial killer, apex predator, generalist apex predator. They don't discriminate. It's not just rats and marsh rabbits. It's all through the food web. Don't underestimate the Burmese python. And just to show you how weird it continues to get, these observations are from some friends years back that we organized and put in the literature. These are two separate images of pythons free swimming way out in the Gulf of Mexico. And when I mean way out, I'll show you. The stone crabbers were pulling up their crab pots, and the one on the left, or the one the guy's holding, was coiled up on the buoy, and the other one was just free swimming in the ocean when the captain was on his way to pull up the pots. And that's how far off the coast they were. That's about 15 miles for one and 8 miles or less for the other, and way off Everglades National Park. Disclaimer, that's about 2 months after Hurricane Irma. So yes, she likely flushed them out of there, but they were going strong. And if there was an island off of there, they'd colonize it. And, we have the Keys down there on the south, and they're doing the same thing. But when you take this behavior, that seawater is a highway, they don't really want to be in there if they don't have to. Take that behavior with the fact that they can use gopher tortoise burrows, armadillo burrows, which range up the state. Well, then you're seeing some of the behaviors that they have that will definitely allow them to expand that range further, which is what they're doing. So that observation is in the literature as well, which brings us to kind of the main topic of the presentation here. What are we doing about it? That's great. We don't just study these animals to death, or actually probably we do for what we do in this project here, because what we've done over the years with the radio telemetry is we've retasked our telemetered animals to work for us. We now track over 30 male pythons that are working for us, working for Collier County, or the citizens of the state of Florida, basically, to take us to where the pythons are. So here's a day tracking, might as well be any day during the breeding season, which generally runs from December to March into April, but the core would be December to March, with around Valentine's Day being the peak for us. You can't make this up, as I mentioned. So here's 10 o'clock in the morning. We had been tracking 2 male pythons for quite a while. One was on one side of the mangroves, one was on the other side. And on this fine morning, the males were beeping from the same spot. And we generally know what that means is they found us a female, and she's the one in the middle. So those are 2 radio tagged male scout snakes, we call them. And that's what we're after, the one in the middle. The males are only good to find us the egg layers. That's the concept here. And so it's a big pile of pythons. Everybody's happy. Everybody's got a python. They're generally not super aggro when they're mating. I say that generally, it all depends. This would be different than messing with a mother snake on her eggs, or a warmed up, say, female snake going from A to B across the road in the middle of the summer. This time of year, they're kind of smutted out, as we say, a little bit. But you never get complacent when dealing with these animals, because there'll always be that one that wants to throw its weight around and let you know about it. So that's a good morning for us. This is what we're after. This is how we start putting points on the board here for us in Southwest Florida. And here's an example of the scouts that are working for us, one of many. This was Python number 13, named Kirkland, not after the Sam's Club or the wholesale brand, after the historic family that was found in this area of Shell Island in Rookery Bay. And this animal was caught going from A to B on the road. And rather than kill him, euthanize him, we flipped him. He's a double agent, and we put him into the program. And over the years, here's his scorecard, not updated. He found us 5 big females, over 100 pounds, chock full of eggs. You would never find these females any other way. The home range that this animal spanned had one minor road that went through it out of, I don't know, square miles, as we saw. And how do you find, if it's one giant haystack out there, how do you find the needles, which are those females? You use these magnets, which are these males. And it's a 2-part system. You have to be working together with your snakes. You have to be a good hunter to read their behavior. They're basically detector snakes. And they're after the same thing we are, big, giant female pythons when they can find them. So here's what that payout looks like again. And you'll see a whole bunch of big snake photos coming up, which we all like big snake photos. Can't see enough of giant snake photos. But here's an intern holding 2 additional males that were found with the larger female. And we never even saw our scout snake on this day of capture last season. He was in an armadillo burrow in the palmetto over there, but we came up on the scene and we bagged the rest of them and turned both of those males into scouts, and they wound up paying out the next season, and the female was humanely euthanized. And here is what we're after. Through the inception of this project, over 1,000 snakes, pulled out 25,000 pounds from an area, I'd say less than 100 square miles in Collier County. You really cannot make this up. And if you told me we'd still be tracking pythons about 10 years ago, I wouldn't have believed you. But we're after these high value targets over here. And all the ones you see coiled up there are those extra large class snakes, probably 125, 150 pounds. And of those 25,000 pounds, we kind of use that metric because it just gives a sense of the biomass of the animals we're finding here. And imagine what that equated to in native wildlife, which is why we're all concerned about this issue. 3/4 of that, 75% of those 25,000 pounds are females, primarily adult females is how that shakes out. And it's always good to kind of look at these numbers that way. It's how many are females, how many are adults, how much of that represents hatchling snakes that most likely will never make it to an adult. And this is just what we found, 12 tons of snake in an area less than 100 square miles. Geez, if that's 1%, if that's 10% or something, that's insane. You really can't make this up. And that's the moral. Here's on this lab table here, this is very meta, I guess, from one season of many, those are all females. All of the small, those are medium-sized pythons, if we were really putting our yardstick how we use them. So all of those are females, all of those are gravid, and that's what it would look like during the necropsy. All of those are developing follicles. We found them before they had a chance to lay those eggs. And that's how we operate here. We're looking for those high value targets across the landscape. Of course, we're not going to get them all, but each season we call top down a considerable amount of these snakes that were ready to drop eggs right on the edge of town and out in key Everglades restoration areas and conservation lands. It's kind of a pretty photo if you look at it in a way. It's creepy cool. And I don't know if it translated, but myself and the other biologists on this project, we have a tremendous amount of respect for these animals. They're pretty awesome, what they're capable of doing. They were brought here through the pet trade, no fault of their own. They're just being a giant snake. We don't like having to put them down, but in case someone's wondering, there's nowhere to take these animals. They have different parasites and different genetics now from the native stock. So there's no easy answer on this other side of the conservation cause here. Just some random photos from out in the field, getting after it. That's my right-hand man over there, Ian Easterling, on the big snake, like the bass guitar, if you will. And she is wrapping him up and letting him know about it. That's why it's always good to have a friend nearby when you got a snake over 12 foot and they want to put the squeeze on you. And he was just kind of letting her feel. I mean, it's pretty impressive to let one of those wrap a coil around the arm or a leg. You just get that feeling of what native wildlife felt on their way out with these animals. And when, you see what's coming out of these animals, you don't get too attached because what's at stake here. And so just how we have to, these are not caught on roads and levees, where this method gets you off grid. You have to hack and slash and get after it and go where the pythons go, and, bag them up and get them out. There's one. We found that a 70-pound python will fit in this cubic volume of backpack. And then it's all logistics. How do you get a 150-pound snake out of the woods? Could go on and on about the little finer points of removing giant snakes from the ecosystem. And just an example of the scout methodology at work. And I think one reason why we're so effective over here to some degree, if that's the description we want to use, is that we work with private partners wherever we can find them. Because as you know, invasive species, they don't care about any boundaries put out. They don't care if it's federal, state, private, tribal lands. They're going to go where they go. So here's a day tracking a scout snake named Argo that I'm holding. And then here's his girlfriend. And she was found in this culvert pipe with him on a nursery property on the edge of a conservation land. And we got the help of the private landowners to dig the pipe out that we couldn't get in. And they shook out Argo and shook out his girlfriend. And we brought the girl back, humanely euthanized her. And then our scout was let loose. And just for proof of concept, 3 days later, half a mile away, that's the amount of python he found us after we caught him and brought him back to the lab. So that was an aggregation of, 8 total pythons. 1, 2, 3. I remember 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Our scout is out of the photo here because he was still working for us. And all the ones coiled up and stretched out are euthanized, except the one in the hands became a future scout named Donnie Darko that really paid out for us. All the seasons past, he's usually good for 1 or 2 150-pound females. He likes large snakes. And so, yes, that is kind of how we're paying it forward. You almost have to, this method requires a lot of patience, of which I usually don't have. But for this assignment, I guess I do in this sense, is that snake that's tagged, we got to wait a year on him. He's not sterilized. He's out there doing his thing, and it pays forward. And he paid out the next season with multiple snakes, 150 pounds. And each season that male has got us a female python or more. And so the ends justify the means, in my opinion, on letting them do what they do so we can get this egg layer out of the system. Here's just a shot from this season, just kind of showing you that we go where they go. And that was an interesting capture in that one of the scout snakes that we had to track out to in the mangrove zone had a male snake nearby him in the breeding season, which is almost a dead giveaway that there's a female nearby. But we searched far and wide for about a half hour, could not find her. But before we left, we kind of looked way off in the distance. This is just that fine scale where the experience comes in, and we saw a little sawgrass poking out of one of these distant mangrove areas in the red mangroves. And I thought, what if? So walked across this bay, peered in through the bushes, and you can't just make this up. There was a giant, a extra large snake with a male or two mating with her. And so we had to bag all of them up and then float them through a canal and back to the truck and back to the lab. And that was just one day at the office from this photo here that I'm having flashbacks, PTSD, as I look at it. And another shot from the previous breeding season of there's snakes in the backpack, and we got to get them out. We want that information. We don't just kill them in the field. We want to know, we put them down humanely in the lab and then do the necropsies. And so that's a good 2 weeks there on those snakes on the table at the peak of the breeding season. Those would all be peak of breeding season coming in following your scouts, high value targets. And those are all female pythons over 15, 16 feet right there. And that's 2 weeks from one breeding season. And we've been doing this for 9 years over here. And our collaborators, our partners in Big Cypress, USGS, and the National Park Service are using scout snakes there as well. But that's a pretty daunting area, as you can imagine, to get after it in the middle of nowhere in the Big Cypress. So I just wanted to tip the hat to one slide so that you didn't think we're just betting the farm on following snakes around to get after the python population. Here's swabbing the skin of pythons for their skin lipids. And then those samples are sent off to another lab. And then maybe someday in the future, we'll have a chemical attractant where these animals would put themselves in a box. Wouldn't that be nice? And we may gain some ground, but to have no illusions, this is a short-term methodology using scout snakes in certain areas of the state that seem to be pushing back in key areas. But we're aware that, we need a landscape level approach here to ever get, and, I wouldn't say never for eradication, but that seems very unlikely. But who knows, 5-10 years from now, will there be a genetic technique that someone could put out there that may have utility? Don't know, but this is just some information from the last 10 years chasing these animals around and what we're finding and how the support from these various entities are allowing us to actually apply that science and to get after these pythons on the ground. So I just want to leave the acknowledgement slide up there for a second. I think we did the time fairly well, so we'll have more time if there's any questions to relay. But I appreciate your interest on the topic. I'll stop sharing the screen and happy to take any questions.
Great job, Ian. Thank you so much. And the questions have been coming in, so I'm gonna dive into them if you're ready.
Let's go.
Great. First one's from Brian. He wanted to know how the python range in Florida has expanded in the last decade. Should Central Florida expect them soon?
As I said, never underestimate the python. I kind of keep watch here in the southwestern corner of the state, but we have a good old boy network that's up and running that allows us to get a lot of information coming quick. And so Felda, a lot of sightings from Felda starting to show on Ocalawacuchee Slough area. And I've been told that they're up at the Lake Okeechobee area. So there's an invasion front that's moving north. And as you saw, this isn't just like they're not coming for our children. But to that point, that's why we cover this base now, not coming for the children, but coming for livestock and other types of animals. We've seen them get goats that people have had in their animal husbandry farms, chickens. So that's very much on the radar screen for python. So, but to your question, yep, they'll make their way. They can't deal with a big freeze, as we'd all know, but they're savvy enough to get underground and overwinter, or I don't know about overwinter, but I think there are pockets of the state that they'll surprise us as far north as they'll be capable of going over the years.
Great, thank you. We had a couple of questions, and I know you addressed this by saying that the snakes, when they're euthanized, like they're carrying diseases, and so we had a question about if they're used, if they're ever eaten, or if there's boots or any other goods made from them, and I just wanted to give you a chance to address that again.
Yeah, so I'll dive into that question. So our mantra on this project is cool, calm, follow the science on it. And to that point, when people ask, what do we do with our pythons? As much science as we can get out of these animals as possible. Here's an example on the table of an articulated specimen put together by Florida Gulf Coast University. Most of our pythons go to the forensics lab, feeds their beetle colonies. I wouldn't say most, a lot of them do. Most of the carcass goes back out in the system and gets put back in the food web. The boots and belts question is just kind of a slippery slope. I'm aware of the audience here, but it's just something to keep in mind, however you sit on this side of the argument, in that if this is a vulnerable species in the home range, and we start getting a vibrant skin trade going, it'd be very hard to police which ones are coming into the state that aren't from Southeast Asia and doing more of a disservice to that population. So at the Conservancy, a nonprofit environmental organization here with a wildlife hospital that treats 5,000 native animals a year, this is the side of the equation that I'm on here, as much science as possible that we get out of these animals. And just to share, it's just kind of cool just thinking about it now when we put some of these carcasses back out there. The vultures are onto it in a second, and we'll put down, 1,000 pounds of snake out there. And when we drive our truck back, there's a vortex of python python up in the air inside the bellies of these python of the vultures. So I don't know, that was just really cool to see it going back into the system, if that makes any sense. I think, I don't know if I have a question, but.
Yeah, Python vortex is a new nightmare. So thanks for that. But all right. So Chris wants to know if the scout snakes are tracked daily, and if not, how often they're tracked.
Yep, it depends. Some of them that are far afield, they're pain in the ass to get to every day, of course. So they're on like a weekly check cycle if we can get to them during the breeding season, and then we kind of like, every 2 weeks now in the off season, which we are now. We're catching our breath now because we've been chasing female pythons around for the last few months. So we're tired like all of our male snakes, but we'll still get up in the plane for aerial telemetry every other week and kind of keep tabs on where our animals are across the landscape. The day that I do have those snakes, like I can sit back at my computer screen and watch them. That'll take a lot of fun out of it, I guess, but that would be pretty wicked cool to see where all your animals are real time. There's always one problem child that you don't know exactly where they are. When you police all the rest of them up, it's kind of like, where's Johnny? He's a problem child again, but we'll get back on him. We know their behavior, and these animals move when they want to. I mean, you can go from 1 week and the next week that animal's 3 miles away in a different, conservation land. And so it might take you, well, if you're not, so we're not onto them daily, because that we go for the bigger, wider reach with more animals than a fine tune. And over the years, we've built up a motley crew cast of characters of pythons stretched out all the way across the coast over their home ranges. And I forgot to mention that's how this really works, because we don't have all our eggs in one basket over one side of the range we're working. We have a couple of males working together, close to the coast. And then as we get further in, we'll put new animals out in higher density areas. And one of those males found us 5 breeding females this last breeding season. Whereas another male where we've been putting pressure for many seasons now, you'd be hard pressed to find one big girl coming out of there. Doesn't mean she's not there and we haven't found her yet, but we'll see more of our scouts in that area come and hang out with the other scouts because the high value target females are few and far between. So we're well aware that the younger graduating class is working their way up to the ranks, but we're mopping them up. We're going back in time from and getting the larger ones and working our way back. Forget the question, but I hope I answered it.
No, you got it. So this kind of ties in. Jeff had 2 questions. At which age are they able to reproduce, and how many clutches can they produce per year? And then they have a question about how many eggs per clutch, which I know you showed us that graph with.
No, these are all really important questions, and they go back into what the big push right now that other researchers will call it, and you'll hear more of this over the years, is the vital rates studies that they want to get at. We all do, and we have been over on our own pace here in the western part of the state on the vital rates, the life history parameters. So all those things of the age to the female being reproductively active, the average clutch size of eggs. That's why that graphic I showed you, there's a lot of information hidden in there, how often they'll lay the clutch. And I mentioned it's generally every other year, but we've seen in many instances, and I think it just relates to the fitness level of the animal, that they can very much lay every year in a row. And so very shoot from the hip. My thoughts is that a python that can get to be 16, 17 feet probably already laid 500 eggs in that lifetime. We don't know how old that female is, nor do we know how old yet, but very soon we probably will, the age of reproduction. But if I had to take a very quick educated guess, I'd say it's likely 2.5 or 3.5 years old that they will start reproducing. All this becomes extremely important because what all that matter, that's pointing at trying to get at the population density in the background, because all these numbers I tell you about, pounds and numbers, it doesn't really mean terribly much unless you know, as you know, from wildlife management, what the background population estimate is. But I just think we need to get at the right order of magnitude. Of those, 1,000 snakes we pulled out, are there 100,000 pythons in that area, or are there 10,000 that we're trying? So that order of magnitude and a better, more refined sense of what their, the population dynamics are mission critical, and those get to the questions you were asking. And here's what an egg clutch looks like. This is an average clutch of 42 eggs, and I think that's going up now with some recent data. So, boa constrictors are live bearing; they just squiggle out, and then the python is guarding her eggs and having a massive sized clutch. And all this information is going to become important. That's why the whole follow the science, the research and removal. It's great that everyone's hunting, gathering, and getting after them. That's awesome. But a foundation built on the science and the background of this animal is mission critical, so that these emerging strategies are going to be more impactful.
No, that's a great point, and thank you for showing that. That's incredible. So Ian, we had a question from Katie wondering, when is breeding season? I know you said you just got done with spending months in the field. So when are the animals breeding?
Well, I can tell you the earliest I've ever seen two pythons together was the end of October. That's an outlier. And the latest we've seen them are second week of April. But they're really starting to kind of around the holidays in December, mid-December, mid-January to mid-February to mid-March. So mid-December to mid-March would be the peak, the hump, the bell curve. With, generally around February, we see, most pythons in aggregations if we didn't bust them up before that. So good questions. Yes.
Great. We have a question from Nancy asking, I know you mentioned that you are humanely euthanizing them in the lab, and they're wondering how you actually do that. What does humane euthanasia look like?
So it's generally chemical assisted veterinarian euthanasia. So, but nothing that the chemical gets in the tissues that would make that toxic to wildlife. So, and we were able to do that because we can. But I'm aware that in other areas, and I'm here to tell you, it's quick and, it is humane. We care about these animals. There's other methods with bolt gunning and pithing brains. We don't really employ that over here just because we don't need to at the moment. And so, yeah, that's what that means.
Great. Thank you for that clarification. Julie's just commenting that it looks like you need to lift some weights to be in shape for picking up those snakes. I think there were.
Oh, that I need to lift weights,
or just like in general,
thanks for that,
general
Julie.
Population. You need to be strong to pick up those big old pythons.
We have a joke. We have a joke. So she teed me up to use it. We always ask, like, how do we catch these pythons? And if my intern was here, we'd say with these pythons. So that's how we get. That's how we get after them, Julie.
Oh, well, it sounds like Julie's in on the inside joke then. Jeff is wondering if your data is suggesting if progress is being made on reducing the populations.
Yeah, you just have to take that with a grain of salt. I can tell you qualitatively, as somebody that watches my scout snakes season to season, and as I alluded to in one of those earlier questions, that there'll be a sector that we've put a lot of pressure on real time, and those scouts are not finding us as many reproductively active females is a good tell in certain areas of our, I say this term, our control zone. Let's not even use that word because it's very much about removal, but we may have localized management occurring, but that's hard to hang your hat on that. I believe it, but I'm biased because I've been dragging these snakes out for so many years, but I like to be at the position to show that years in the as we get more of this life history data in. I believe the hypothesis that I'm running on is that what we've done over here, yes, it's definitely pushing back in some key areas, but don't underestimate this animal. We need those population metrics so that we can stand on that statistically. So until I have that, I can say that I believe it's working, but I can't show you the statistics yet.
Great. Chris is wondering what an average person can do to help the cause. So I'm just going to make a shameless plug for the foundation. We have a Combating Invasive Species Fund. If you'd like to donate, it helps fund projects like this. In addition to, I mentioned earlier, our redesigned Conserve Wildlife plate, which is what helped fund some of Ian's work. And Ian, I'm sure folks can make a donation directly to the Conservancy of Southwest Florida as well.
Yes, of course. So like I said, it takes a village, takes a lot of moving parts. We're on the front line of this issue, and we beat ourselves up over the last decade chasing these animals around. And so what you can do is what I always say. I'm not sure what part of the state you're calling in from, but just be on point with the invasive species issue. Florida has more species of non-native reptile and amphibian than most countries in the world. And so if it doesn't familiarize yourself with our native wildlife, and if it doesn't look like it's supposed to be here, you snap a picture, you download the Ed Maps. I've got one app, IVEGOT1. You can download that for the smartphone. I should have put a slide in this presentation on that. And then people that are responders see that real time. I'll see on my phone in Collier County if someone saw a boa constrictor, which a couple of those came in 2 weeks ago, just to give you an idea of what else is on the emerging line of things. So, be an observer, get familiar with native wildlife. You never know, like if you're at the park, you pull into the grocery store, depending on where you are in Florida, there's some new lizard that's just getting established there. And as you would know, that early detection, rapid response, that's what you need, because when these animals get critical mass and they're up and out, they're established and they're almost next to impossible for eradication. So those are some of the things that come to mind real quick.
Great. Eric is wondering when the first python was found in South Florida.
South Florida. So the origin story of python, I could go on and on about this, so I'll try to be brief. But to my knowledge, in 1979 in Everglades National Park, you had your first Burmese python found on the road. Did somebody let Fluffy go down there and that was a one and done for 10 years? Or did somebody keep doing that? The way I like to say is just to keep in mind here, if this was a multiple choice test, and how did pythons get here? And A was unintentional release, the snake got out of the bag. And B was intentional release, somebody and a whole bunch of their buddies up to no good. C is meteorological events like Hurricane Andrew knocking over a reptile breeding facility, which most people love to say that's how it started, and that's kind of a cop-out for that no one else wants to take responsibility for how this happened. And I would circle D, all the above. And what you have to keep in mind is that python's the poster child, it's out of the bag, but this is very much still happening. It isn't like there's been an educational campaign and no one's going to let something naughty go again. It's happening all the time. There's a lot of people that just want to watch it burn. And so I don't know how you get to that, but this isn't the last of the exotics and the non-natives and the invasives that you'll see popping up in Florida. That's why being vigilant is important. But to your question, they didn't really start getting on the radar screen more towards the early 90s, the 2000s on the Eastern Everglades. And then in Southwestern Florida, where I'm sharing information from, it wasn't until a visiting researcher, Dr. Paul Andreatis, found the first hatchling on the road cruising in 2009, I believe. So they very much were here getting critical mass underfoot until that's the thing. If you're in an area, and I'll get myself off this soapbox here, but if you're in an area and you constantly start seeing roadkill on your roads, possums and rabbits and all that other stuff, and then one fine day, whoop, there's a python hit on the road. It didn't just show up there then. That python is representative of that range expansion of those animals that have been underfoot for, however long.
That's a really great point. Thank you, Ian. Unfortunately, we have a lot of other great comments and questions, but we are running up on time. So I put in the chat a survey link. We'd love to get your feedback on how today went. You can also add in your questions there and we can pass those along to Ian. Andrew Walker, our president and CEO, has joined us today from the road. So I just wanted to give Andy a chance to add any conclusion thoughts he might have had from today's talk?
Well, I just thank you, Michelle, very much. And thanks everyone for being a part of today's webinar. And Ian, especially to you and your team. It's amazing work, and of all the strategies that have been employed to try to reduce the number of pythons in the wild, I think yours has by far been the most successful to date, and we look forward to continuing to work with you and support this work. I also want to just say again how important it is, as Ian says, to get on these issues early. Tegus, Argentinian black and white tegus, are a large reptile that's also increasingly becoming a problem. Some of you have probably heard about. Our foundation, we hope to do more public education around that. FWC has a hotline now where you can report invasive tegus and other things that you see. And as a lot of you know, we put a lot of money into your money into panther conservation. So the fact that panthers are having such a major impact on small mammals and even deer in South Florida is greatly concerning. And I think a lot of people in the hunting community tend to blame panthers for there not being many deer in South Florida, but this is far and away a much bigger contributor to declining deer populations in that part of the state. So again, Ian, I just want to thank you and the Conservancy of Southwest Florida, all the wonderful work you do in so many different areas. And again, thank you all for your support of our foundation, your interest in this topic. And Michelle, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Andy. Appreciate you taking time to join us. Ian, anything else you'd like to say before we jump off today?
Just to come full circle, appreciate everyone's interest in tracking this issue with us. It's the wildlife issue of our time here for Southwest and Southern Florida. So stay tuned in the future for some more interesting updates. And thank you, Andrew and Michelle, for your support of the project. And we'll definitely talk more with you in the future because we're not going anywhere soon. And we're going to keep tabs and stay on the front lines of this issue here from the Southwest. So thank you all very much.
Great. Thanks, Ian. And thanks everyone for joining us. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to shoot them our way, either via that survey link or my information is on the contact us page of our website. See you next month.